this video, we're going to learn the different types of ORM, and for this topic, I'll be discussing about Mongoose with nodeJS. So now, without any further ado, let's get started. To start with, I'll be using VS Code. And for you guys, you can use any IDE as long there's a nodeJS installed. So to start with, let's start with npm init -1. If this is your first time in running nodeJS, I would advise everyone to please check my video on the basic nodeJS tutorial from Zero to Hero, so that all of these topics are for you to understand. So the requirements are make sure you know the basic of Mongoose and JavaScript as well. So let's start. So at this point here, for the requirements, I'll be installed basic express, and of course we also require the Mongoose. Please take note, I won't be using any front end, but instead I'll be using Thunder Client. So for you guys, since if you watch my previous video, I already demonstrate on how to use Thunder Client. Thunder Client is a counterpart of Postman. So, but since we're using VS Code, Thunder Client is one of the most popular use when it comes to REST API tests like this one. Okay, cool. So we're done. Okay, let's examine our package. So as you can see, our dependencies as of the time of this recording is 4.17.1 and Mongoose at version 6.0.8. Okay, cool. So at this point, we're going to create an entry point. So let's start with server.js. Okay. So to start, let's start with cons express. And I'm going to call these requirements. So the package we need to install or load first is the express. And from here, I want to go cons app equals to express. Good. And let's start with the bar server. Or should I say, let's start with app.set. We want to set our port. And from that port, we want to set our process .env.port, or going to assign this at port 3000. Okay, and then from here, going to set our server, going to call the app.listen, then going to call this app.get. App.get, oops, and go to call the port, comma. Okay. So just the basic part so that we can initialize our nodeJS. So from here, going to call the function error. Then if error, going to throw an error. Then if no error, going to pass this message. So let's say server is running at http:// localhost localhost plus server.address port. And from here, I'm going to pass this console.log want to pass this message. Okay, cool. Okay, I think I got some errors from here. It should be port. Let's examine. Save. Okay, cool. So I think this is okay now. So let's run. So by here, you can type by node server. And there you go. Okay. For now, we don't have a view for this one. So this is good. So as long as this one is running, so our basic command here is working. Now, a while ago, I discussed about the tools that we're going to use. So for here, I already prepared the standard client and this MongoDB. So for our MongoDB, let's say, first going to show you what is the standard client. Standard client. Okay, so please take note, this is the tools that or the extension that I'm using right now. And we need to install this one. And of course, we need to install MongoDB. Okay, so yeah, so this is the first one. So take note, please use this one. Either way, you can use any IDE for MongoDB. So the most common are, let's say this one, the Robo3T. So this is one of the IDE that most commonly used. So you can use also this one. So it doesn't matter. So right now, I have a bunch of database here. So let's say, no, to delete this one here. Okay. So whatever the database that I have here will also be viewed inside the VS Code. So let's say this one. Okay, so cool. So that's it. So this is the connections or the extension that you're going to require. So just in case you don't have any IDE to use, you can use the pre-built from extension of VS Code. So this one is really a good tools to view your Mongoose or MongoDB. Okay, cool. So let's go back here. Okay. So before that, make sure you have MongoDB installed. You need to download from the community version. So make sure you install that. So once you have your MongoDB, then we can perform this application. So let's start. Now for these requirements, I'm going to create a database connection. So to do that, I'm going to call db.js. Should be outside. Then from here, I'm going to call the Mongoose. Going to import Mongoose or require. Mongoose. Okay, so that's it. So from here, okay, so I'm going to set our Mongoose. Mongoose equals to, okay, since I'll be using only the local, so I'll be going to use this connection, MongoDB / localhost 27.0.17. Okay, so for now, I'll be using DB customer. Alright. So if you're working with local connections, so this is the local connections, probably the basic connection. So at the end of this extension, you need to create this database or set up this database. Okay, so next to that, want to call our Mongoose that promise. Then going to assign this as global dot promise. Okay, so that this will be available to all the project. So next, going to call the Mongoose dot connect. So I'm going to assign the DB. Okay. Let's examine this one by one. So from here, DB comma. So let's start with curly braces. Let's start with use new URL parser. We want to set up as true. Then want to use unified topology set up to true. Okay, so good. So once you set up that, let's start with the function error. Oops. Function error. Okay. Then it error. Then going to print the error, of course. Print by console.log. So let's say error. Class error. Good. Okay, so I think this is good. Okay, let's cancel this first. For this one, I'll be using nodemon, but on our case, I won't be install nodemon on this project, but instead, I'm going to call the npx, then nodemon, and the application itself. Okay. So same goes. If you have a stable connection, this one is a good one. So npx is most popular or most common thing when it comes to JavaScript. Okay, good. So our connection is okay now. So we go. The next thing we need to do now is we need to prepare our. First, we need to call our database. So to do that, we need to set up that in our server. So from here, let's say going to call cons API equals to require. Then we call our DB. Okay, so DB is not defined. Okay, so let's check. Oh yeah, this should be DB equals. So let's set up this to DB equals. Just to make sure that everything is okay. Okay, Mongoose connection is not a function. So let's check why. Oh, yeah, of course. So we need to remove this one. Okay, so let's check. Okay, good. So we're okay now. So I'll make sure that everything is okay. So let's examine DB. So I'm going to Okay, so this is the connection string for the database, and these are the connections. Okay, so far so good. We are okay. Let's move things a little closer. Okay. Okay, so let's examine our database here. Refresh. Okay. At this point, our database is not yet created. At later, but once later when we insert a value, so this database, the one that we set up a while ago, which is a DB customer, will be automatically create and save all those values. Okay, good. Now, okay, that should be the first one. Now, next is we're going to, since we already prepared our database and the connection, the next thing we need to do now is we need to create a router or a routes. So to start with, we're going to create a new folder. Going to name this as routes, and going to insert a new file. And this is index.js. Now for our first connection, okay, for our first connection is we're going to display all the records. But before that, we're going to prepare these routes. To start with, we just create as module exports. Then we're going to assign or insert that in our function app. Okay. And this take note, I pass an app variable. So for our first request, we're going to call the all customers. That is customers/all. Okay. Now, in this case here, we're going to pass that in our controller. So since we don't have the controller, I just going to make one. So I mean is going to prepare this one. So let's say going to declare that here. So cons controller, then going to require. Okay, let's create that controller first before we proceed with our routes. So go back here, let's create another folder, and going to name that as controller. And from our controller, I'm going to create a new file, and we're going to name that as customer.js. Okay, good. Now going back to our routes, from here, I'm going to call that controller customer. And from that controller, I'm going to pass that controller from here to here. And I'm going to assign a function called find all. Okay. Okay, so don't you worry. At this point here, this function is not yet available. So what we're going to do is we're going to prepare that. Okay, so maybe let's do a conventional from here. So let's say going to create or rename this one. Instead of customer, let's make it a conventional call. Let's say customer controller. Okay, so that should be it. So that in our routes, I'm going to, okay, good. This one's auto replace. Okay, once you run your node mon, it will automatically rewrite the content, especially these external files. But before that, before going further, let's make first our model. Very important because right now our connections from this point here requires a database or table mapping. So to begin with, let's start by creating a new folder. And from here, I'm going to create a new file. And we're going to call that as customer.js. Okay, cool. Okay, take note. So this will be our table. So we call that as customer.js. So let's call our Mongoose. So let's start with var Mongoose equals to require Mongoose. And then from here, going to call var customer schema. So from our schema, I'm going to call our Mongoose, new Mongoose dot schema. Okay. So similar to if you watch my video about SQLize and Bookshelf, or SQLize, the specific. In here, we're going to assign that property. So let's say for this one, we will be needing the ID customer, the ID number. Or rather, yeah, I think should we need okay, so we're going to create an ID number, an email with a string, address with a string, and phone with a string. So maybe we can remove this one, because what it does is Mongo will prepare an ID field or ID field for us. So it is no need for us to create the ID column. Okay, so good. So and then let's copy that and export this content. So from here, I'm going to call the exports equals to Mongoose that model. So that will be customer and schema. Okay, so right now we managed to create our models for the table, but at this point it's not yet auto created. So we're going to check here. Okay, so nothing's in it. So for that to work, we need to prepare some operations to call that table. So let's start with the first one. We created this function, which is find all, in our routes. So we call that in our customer controller. So let's check or go back to our customer controller. Okay, so the requirements for here is, since we'll be needing that schema, so we're going to call var customer require require that slash model slash customer. Let's start by export that find all. So So at this point here, we're going to use the async request and rest. Okay, so let's start by this one. Okay, good. So let's start first by creating a customer pineall. So from here, let's write customer.pine. Then going to assign a function data. Okay, so if going to print the console.log else else going to print that data by returning res send data. Right, cool. Okay, so yeah, so at this point here we call the model and we assign this pineall to assign in our routes. So this time pineall now here is functional, but before we continue, we need to call our routes in our server.js so that this function will be usable. So to do that, let's go back to our server.js. Let's say between here, we want to call that routes, cons routes. Then we're going to assign the require /routes /index. Okay, and another thing, since if you recall, as you check our routes, we call that the app variable here. So we pass this variable here. So make sure in our server.js, we need to pass that as well. So over here. So this app is the express. So I'm going to save that. Okay, cool. Okay, good. So now that we have our, let's save this as well. Alright. Okay, so at this point here, we already connected with our set up the connection from our routes. And from our routes, we already created the function for the pineall, which is stated in the customer controller here. So let's check. Okay, so we have an error here. App is not defined. Okay, let's go back in routes. Okay, oops, should be app. Let's check again. Okay, cool. So everything seems okay. So these are routes. So this time, let's try first with Thunder client. So I'm going to make a new request. Okay. Good. Let's move this a little closer. Okay, so let's call our first routes. Our first HTTP request should be localhost 3000 slash. So from the slash here, make sure we know first we need to get this one. I'm going to copy this one here. And and put that in our requests. So please take note, we don't have the database yet. So let's try this for now. And there you go. So as you can see, this one works. But if we check our database, let's refresh this one here. Okay. Upon refresh, as you can see, this will automatically create the database and the table itself. Okay. So that happens because in MongoDB, since this is a NoSQL, the function will only perform if we're going to perform the code or calling the function to create or assign or call the operation. As long there's an operation, that's the time they're going to create the database and the table. So as you remember, we assign the database in this section here in our DB. So we assign that. So once this is called, it will follow with the model that we assigned. And of course, upon request, this will display or capture from this point here. So let's examine first our MongoDB, just to make sure. Okay, from here, okay. Alright. Notice that this one is auto-created, the database and the model or the schema. But notice we don't have the properties of the table. It is simply because in Mongoose or MongoDB, same goes, as long we insert an operation, this will create an automatic field based on the model that we create. So in here, we only create these three model here, or three column here. So this will only take effect once we insert or perform an insert operation. So let's try. Okay. So from here, let's go back to our routes. Okay. To make it work, let's perform a create or insert method. So let's say, going to move here, going to type app.post. Then going to assign a create. Okay, and comma controller dot create. Okay, so this time we're performing a post method. So we're going to create this function in our controller. So I'm going to save that. So from here, so don't mind with the errors because right now we don't have any values yet. So what we need to do is we need to create that function. Let's make this from here. To save a lot of time, I'm going to copy this here and paste here. I'm going to replace this as 8. Okay. Now what are the requirements for create? So since we're going to pass a value, we're going to call this as cons, and we're going to pass that in the request body. So what are the requirements? So from here, we're going to pass the name, email, address, including phone. Okay. Okay, from here, we're going to create our bar, create a new customer, equals to new customer. Okay, so this one is from our model. So take note, that is the name of our model here. So we assign that here. And from our new customer, we're going to insert that name, call the name, new customer dot email. Now just to be consistent, so we're going to pass the email, new customer dot address. Okay, so take note, I'm capturing the value from this section here. So this is where we pass our value to save our new entry. And from here, we're going to include last one. This is customer.phone. Phone. Okay. Now, after we create the insert variables, next is we need to call the new customer to perform the save function. Okay, so let's start with function with the data. Okay, so take note, this is the formation. So let's perform with if console.log, going to pass that error. Okay, and then if no error, so else, going to resend send data inserted. Okay, so data inserted. Let's see. Yeah, okay, so let's examine. So from here, we create the function of the create. So when we pass this value from our request body, and from that section, we perform a saving method. So this is where we save this value here. Okay, so but for that, there's another requirements for us for this to work. Since we're passing a value, Express prepared a middleware to read the format of the entry value. So for that to receive, for that to work, we need to use this one, use. We call the property of express.json, because right now we're going to pass this as a JSON value. Okay. Other than that, we need also this use express.url encoded. For this, we need to interpret our values. So of course, we're going to extend that to true. Okay, take note, this is very important if you're passing a value from the front end to your nodeJS, which is the backend. So let's start. So from here, I'm going to perform the post request using this create request or post create request. So let's go back to our request here. Going to make a new request. Okay. So let's say going to copy this one. And request method is post, and we're going to copy this / create. Okay, good. And also, this should be a post method. Now, our request is required a JSON. So from here, I'm going to prepare our JSON. Now, okay, so what are the values needed for our JSON? So let's start with the name, email, address, and phone. Okay, so let's split that up. Okay, so from here, let's say I'm going to call or insert this value as wiki. Okay, and for the email, let's say should be wiki@gmail.com. Address, say Philippines. Phone number, so let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, good. So make sure you have a knowledge about JSON. Basically, if you're working with the front end, everything should pass or pose with JSON. So this should be the format in submitting a request. So let's try. So let's move this a little closer. Okay, so let's try sending this request and hit send, and there you go. Now let's check our value. So a while ago we performed the find all, this one. So let's try to check if this is working. So let's send this request, and there you go. Okay, as you can see, MongoDB are already created this, or the MongoDB already create this ID number. So by default, it returns this format. So take note the serial ID number format is the UID. So this is how Mongoose works. Now a while ago, we demonstrate also on how these ones create. So let's examine. In our database, customers, going to refresh this one. At this point, we have a document. So this referred to as document. So this is how MongoDB represent the value. So if you're going to click that, same those. Notice that it will only represent as a JSON format. That's how MongoDB works. We only set the properties within the code, and from Mongoose or MongoDB, they're going to interpret that as the basic JSON that we know. Okay, so that's it. So let's continue. Okay, let's go back to our routes. Okay, so from our routes, now that we perform a post request, the next thing we need to do is we're going to perform a find first, or a search request using the ID. So let's start with app.get. Let's say going to perform a /get/:id. Okay. Now from here, going to call the controller, going to name this as find first. Of course, this one is not yet available, so let's create this function. So from here, okay, so let's perform that. Okay. So to make it a little faster, going to copy this portion here so that we're going to just replace. Okay, so that's it. Now, okay, so at this point here, we're passing a. Okay, so let's start with. First, we need to extract the ID. So to do that, let's start with ID. Then going to extract that from our request params. Then we're going to pass a model which we're going to perform find1. And then for our find1, we'll be using the ID. So let's start with this one first. So should we submit or pass with this field ID? Let's do it like this. Okay, so let's try first with the basic ID. We'll see if that works. Okay, so from here, then, oops, should be comma and enter. Then we're going to perform a function data. Okay. Error. So same goes. So this is only an error checking. Console.log else going to rest or resend the value of data. Okay. So let's try first. Watch carefully with this ID. Because right now I'm just using the normal, this one. Let's see if that works. Basically, the fields it requires, if you examine this one, this requires this one. So let's try first with the normal ID, with this one. If not, let's try with the underscore. Okay, so let's go back with our routes. Then let's do this one, get ID. So from our request, from our, okay. Let's move it here. I'm going to copy this one. Should be get and the ID. So take note, here we perform a /get/ID. Now, we need to copy that ID. So to do that, let's copy this one. Copy this ID. Then from here, we're going to pass it on the URL. Okay, so let's try. So from here, going to send, and there you go. Now let's try to insert more. So just to make sure that this is working, let's say going to create another one. Let's say Richmond, which going to send that. Okay, so if you're going to check that, we have 2 records. So let's try again with our get request. So Go to hit send and save. So this works. So if we're going to search for this ID, oh, okay, so we don't have names. So let's check here. Oh yeah, no wonder. I noticed that we don't have name. We should include a name. A while ago, I keep inserting a string, then noticing that there's no name. But our code didn't receive returns an error. So let's include a name string here so that this will add a field portion for the name. So let's save that. Okay. So from our Mongoose, we're going to refresh that. Okay. Oops. After. Let's move that here. Okay. This is one of the advantage of using MongoDB or the Mongoose. It's simply because if you miss something, Mongoose will adjust for you. So let's say like this one. On our case, we didn't include the name, but as you notice that when I create the name value or the insert or the model, upon modifying our model, if you recall, this is our model. Upon inserting this one, this doesn't take effect on the code. It's simply because Mongoose is capable of updating that on the next occurrence. So let's say okay, so let's say I'm going to delete this one so that you can see the difference. So let's say I'm going to make a new request. Okay, so this one. I'm going to insert my name again. Okay. So take note, in here, I already include my name. So if I'm going to insert that, and go to do the request get, if I'm going to click the send request, notice that our next column here, or the next column, is receive the value with the name. So this won't take effect with the previous one. So as you can see, we have the old one. Okay. So that's the power of NoSQL, because you can do anything when during insertion. So that's the beautification with this one. Unlike the SQL, if you insert a value, then you need to tend so much thing to do when using the normal SQL database. So let's continue. Going to insert another value. This time, going to use the Richmond. Richmond. Okay, so you're going to check that. And there you go. So, okay, so there are a bunch here. So we have 2 records with no name and 2 records with name. Okay, so that's the beauty of MongoDB. So let's continue. So let me know on your comment sections about using MongoDB. If you're going to ask me which is the best database, majority, MongoDB is one of the very usable or widely used. But of course, MS SQL or the normal SQL is still one of the best option to use. But these days, we need a dynamic type, which is like this one. Okay, let's continue. Now that we perform the get request for ID, next thing we need to do is, how about we're going to create a update method. So to do that, let's proceed with the put request. From here, I'm going to call the update, and from our controller, let's start with update. And of course, this one is not yet available, so let's copy that. And then let's proceed with the controller. I'm going to move this little, paste it here. I'm going to copy this section here. Then I'm going to replace this with update. Update. Okay, so this will save more time. Okay, so this time, what are the requirements? Okay, same goes. I'm going to copy this section here in the create. Okay, so I'm going to use in this manner, but what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to add an ID field so that this will perform the search value or the search query for this update. So let's continue by calling our model, which is customer.find by ID and update. Okay, so from here, we're going to pass the ID, comma. Take note, so this is ID, comma. And then we're going to pass the value, of course. So from here, we're going to pass the name and email. Address, and phone. Okay, so we already passed the value. Then from here, you want to call the function. So you can just copy the things that we set up a while ago. So they're still the same. Should be comma here. Okay. Then same goes. We're going to pass the error message, the error drop. Then if error, same goes, console.log, passing the error. And else, going to pass the res.send, and then passing the data. Okay. So we can also do this by changing, let's say, I think this is okay. So just to make sure, we can add the console.log here to indicate that this one is success. Data updated. Okay, let's move this a little closer. See, okay, good. So we already prepared our update, so let's work with this one. So going back to our routes, these are routes. So make sure this is the format. So we're performing a put request. So let's go back to our Thunder client, new request. Okay. So from here, I'm going to copy this one. And this one got to change to put request. So this should be update. Update. Okay. From my perspective, I'll be passing this value to JSON. So since we're passing a JSON, let's say, okay, I'm going to pick one from here. So let's say this one. I can copy from here to here and paste that here. Oops. Paste. Okay, now. Sometimes I'll try to paste that using Notepad. Okay, so that paste didn't work. So let's do that again. Copy. Paste. Oh, not working. Okay, so that one did not copy very well. Okay, so I think that's the problem with the using this one. So let's try copying using the application. Let's say refresh. I want to copy this one. So let's try this one. Okay, good. So that one is okay. So I can copy that one and go back to our requests and paste it here. Oh, that one worked. So let's try the copy. Okay, so that really doesn't work. So sometimes this is one of the issues I found, but most cases you can copy this one. Oh, okay, it works. So if I copy here, and okay, so that works. Okay, so we're going to clean this one here. And the ID. The reason I'm doing the copy because of the ID. Because in MongoDB, this is a bunch of numbers and we cannot memorize that, so better to copy paste. And there you go. Okay, so what are the things that we're going to update from here? So this one don't have a name, so I'm going to include the name field. So let's say going to CM. So let's say US and this one. Okay, so take note, I'll be updating this ID number with this new value. So let's try. So using the put command. So let's try and update. And there you go. So let's try to check if this works. Yeah, this is the one. So let's resend. Reach. Okay, so this one did not take effect. Yes, H1. Oh, why? Let's check this value. Make sure our ID is correct. And name. So let's check or examine our update. This update. And then from our customer's ID. One possible reason is that the ID is not much, but in here it says it's updated. So why? Okay, that's weird. Main ID. Okay, let's try with the other fields. Wonder why that didn't take effect. So let's say I'm going to, okay, this one, last one. I'm going to copy this one and put it here. There we go. Going to clean some fields here. Should be ID. Okay. I want to change this as Cyan Rosa. Yes, it is. Cyan. And the value here should be 5555. Okay, let's try this one. So update, put, so send. Okay, so which means the ID, that's a problem. Yeah, I think it's the ID. So this one did not pass very well. So we need to examine why this one did not pass the value. Update, update. On the update, so let's try this find by ID and update. So this is the ID. For email, I got console log. That seems good. So let's check why. Find by ID and update. Console.log. And data. Okay, let's try this one once more. It seems because our ID is not capturing this properly. So I'm going to send that. Seems it works, but the value here returns different. So you're going to change, or better see the light data. Should be this one. Nope. Okay. So the update value. Okay, so I think the update value has a problem here. Let's examine this carefully. Okay, in here we pass the ID, so I believe this one is working. Okay, so let me examine this first as to why the update didn't work. So let me pause for a while. Let's see. Okay, I think I found the problem. So from this point here, let's revise this content so that we can simplify this code. So what we need to do is first, I'm going to replace this one. Okay, so at this point here, we're going to only capture the ID from the request body, and from our request body, instead of like this, since we're returning a value, we're going to replace that by declaring this step and calling now the request.body. Okay. Now, so from here, I'm going to replace this as JSON. I'm going to clear this up here. So since we're returning a JSON, I'm going to return a message. So let's say updated successfully. Okay, so that should fix our problem. A while ago, I did a lot of tests on how to fix this problem in update. So let's go back to our under client. Okay. I'm going to resend this one. As a bit this time, I already have 2 rows or 2 record because I did some bunch of testing a while ago. So let's say okay, I'm going to pick this one, the last one. Okay, and going back to our put, so this is our update. So okay, okay, so I'm going to replace this one with that ID, and here I'm going to replace this as Cian Carasa, and for the email I'm going to change this as my email, or let's say Cian. Okay, and this one here going to change this to 1 2 3 4 5. So once I hit this send request, and there you go. So at this point here, it's already updated. Now let's check the Thunder client by clicking this get. I'm going to move this a little closer. Okay. So notice I changed that on this section here. So we would expect that this will be auto update. So once I click send, and there you go. Okay, good. So that one works. So it took a while to figure out this problem. So don't you worry, I'm going to post this in my GitHub. So later you can verify this as well. So now let's proceed to the next one. Okay. So we completed the put request. This time, going to add the app.delete. So app.delete is the easiest one. So let's say /delete /:id, and our controller delete. Okay. Going to save that. So since we don't have these functions yet, so let's go back to our controller and going to put that here. Going to copy this one. And we can replace that in here. Okay, cool. So let's proceed with our delete command. Okay, so let's say from here I'm going to call the cons id Then I'm going to get the request params. Okay. Also, going to call the model, which is customer dot find find by ID and delete. Okay, that's the one. Going to copy this ID, comma, and function. Okay, from this function, we can copy the previous one so that it will be a little faster. Want to copy this one from here to here. Then paste it here. Let's check everything. Delete, function close. Okay. Comma, function, else, there. So we have the function, errors. So from here, going to update this one as record deleted. Save. Okay, cool, no error. So what it does is we capture this delete method here, or delete function, and we're going to capture the ID. So from our delete, this is the params. So we pass that to our request parameter. So let's check. So let's say I'm going to delete this last record. Notice I only have 2 records because a while ago I did some tests. So the only record we have is Miggy and Cyan. So I'm going to delete Cyan. So let's proceed with our other client. Okay. So from here, I'm going to paste that ID. Oops. All right. Should be the ID. Okay, let's do that again. Comma. So let's pick that record. So let's say going to copy this again. Copy. Go to the delete. Okay. Do this one here. Should be a plain string here. Okay, so make sure you select the delete method here. Okay, so let's try. So if I hit, if I hit delete, okay, I think there's a problem in this section here. So let's cancel. So since it took a while, so let's examine our code. Okay. So delete unseen ID by ID, find by ID and delete. Okay. So it should be like this. Should be like this, and the closing tag, the last one, should be here. Okay, let's check. Okay, so I should be closing parenthesis here, and this one here. Okay, so seems okay now. So let's try again. Control S, and let's go back here. So if there's it's going to hit this send, and there you go. So let's check if that works. So let's go back and get the get requests for this one. So I'm going to move this one here, then hit send. Okay, good. The remaining one is video. Okay, so that's it. So that's it, guys. So let's do some recaps. Okay. Okay, cool. So this works. Please take note the tools that we use. Take note that we're using this two extension, which is the MongoDB and the Thunder client. So you can use this on your risk. So feel free to ask if you have some comments or suggestions. Please take note, we only just tackled some backends here. So later part, I'm going to merge this with the front end. So just stay tuned. But for now, if you find this video informative, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. And see you guys on the next video series. Cheers!